Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Coffee and Conversation. My name is Tierza Watts. I'm the Director of Student Life at CU Denver, and I have a very special guest here today, Em Alves from our Phoenix Center on campus, PCA. It's the Phoenix Center of Auraria. And so we're excited to share more about that office with you. So Em, you got your coffee with you? You ready for Coffee and Conversations?
I sure am.
All right, she's ready. I got coconut creamer in mine today. Doing good. All right, folks, well, let's jump into this. Em, I'd love to know more about you. If you want to do an introduction and maybe tell us, where did you go to college?
Yeah, so as you said, my name is Em Alves, and I'm the Violence Prevention Education Coordinator here at the Phoenix Center at Auraria. I use they, them pronouns, and I went to college in St. Louis at Washington University in St. Louis. And yeah, I had a really great experience with different professionals, like different staff, student support professionals on campus. And so I actually was pretty surprised to find myself working on a college campus myself. But when I saw the listing, I definitely recalled people that I had met along the way in my undergrad journey, and was like, oh, they were so immensely helpful to me, and I would love to be able to be that for someone else. So my entrance into higher ed was like a little bit of a surprise, but one that I really love working with students so much.
That's awesome. I have a similar story. I got some great mentoring in college from faculty and staff members and decided to make it my career area too. Well, I'd love for our audience to learn more about the Phoenix Center. Can you tell us what your office does? And then I'll ask some follow-up questions.
Yeah, so our office, as you said, it's the PCA for short, so I'll be using that pretty liberally throughout, is the on-campus interpersonal violence and support, interpersonal violence education and support office. So on the education side of things, that's my wheelhouse. I run our peer education program, I set the curriculum, and I supervise interns to go into different classrooms and awareness events to either let folks know about our support services or to actually facilitate different conversations that are really geared towards combating the normalization of violence within our culture. So we have a lot of different workshops like IPV 101, what is interpersonal violence, which for folks listening, interpersonal violence is an umbrella term for relationship violence, sexual violence, and stalking. And then on the support side of things, we have our in-office advocates who can see survivors or people supporting survivors from Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, either in person or virtually.
And you guys have a hotline, right, that people can call?
Yes. So we have our 24/7 helpline, and it is 303-556-2255. And I always say it's better to have that number and not need it than need it and not have it. So folks watching.
I think that's great advice.
Yeah, please save it in your phone, everyone.
So I'll link that phone number and their website in the show notes. So please know that you can find more information when this video is done. So can you give us a little deeper look at what interpersonal violence is? Because I think those umbrella terms of like sexual assault, stalking, etc., people hear those phrases. If they've not experienced, though, it becomes something that doesn't like attach and have the same meaning as if you've experienced it. Do you give us a little deeper dive?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely something that I have seen a lot. So we define interpersonal violence, as I mentioned, sexual violence, relationship violence, and stalking. But within sexual violence, most folks, when they hear the term sexual violence, they're thinking about the end of the continuum or the spectrum of sexual violence. They're usually thinking about rape, sodomy, and intrusion. And that is absolutely a form of sexual violence. But when we think about it as a continuum, it's not a continuum of bad to worse or good to bad. It's just showing how all these different violences are affecting each other. So things on the other end of the spectrum would be like sexist language, rape jokes, sexist jokes. It could be uninvited voyeurism, right? So when someone has a reasonable expectation of privacy, it could be violating that privacy, can be a form of sexual violence. And that's kind of like the classic peeping Tom example that a lot of people are aware of. It can be workplace and and sexual harassment, right? So sexual violence isn't just one thing. And a lot of people don't realize that we also work with childhood sexual abuse survivors. So we're also including that in sexual violence. And then when it comes to stalking, of course, it's, classic someone following, but it can also be someone lying in wait for someone. So getting to know their habits and their schedule and waiting to find them. It could be sending unwanted gifts as a reminder of, I know where you are and there's nothing you can do about that. And it can also be cyber stalking, right? And I know that this is cyber stalking is something that can be really, really misunderstood. And sometimes people will say, oh, I Facebook stalked my date, right? And I'm just, and normally when people say that, they don't actually mean that they stalked their date. They usually mean that they looked through like 2 weeks, like 2 weeks worth of public posts, right? Which is really different than finding out as much as you can and violating someone's privacy with the intent to exert power and control.
It almost feels like when people use that term, like Instagram or Facebook stalk somebody, that our society is trying to normalize that behavior when really it's intrusive and creepy. Until you experience it, it doesn't have the same meaning to when all of a sudden you feel uncomfortable or unsafe.
Absolutely. And so that's one of the things I like to challenge students more to say say what you mean, right? Like if you're not stalking someone, don't say that you're Facebook stalking them, right? And that's one way that we can break down that normalization of violence. And then on the relationship violence end of things, most folks, whenever they hear that term, they're thinking domestic violence, which is a form of relationship violence, but it's a less inclusive term for relationship violence. So relationship violence is a lot broader, and it doesn't require that people are married or living together. And it also doesn't require that it's only two people in a relationship. So we like to say that any two people who are in relationship with one another can experience relationship violence, regardless of their gender identity, how many people are in that relationship, whether or not they're married. And we also like to include family violence within that definition as well, because we know that that's something that a lot of our students are struggling with. And so we want to make sure that folks know that if you're experiencing family violence at home, our services are 100% for you.
Yeah. I know one of the things, I worked in housing for 20 years, running residence halls and supervising them. And every once in a while, we would have relationship violence that was between roommates, not necessarily in a relationship, but there was violence between them as roommates. So somebody shoving somebody, punching somebody, slapping them, because of a lack of either emotional intelligence or the ability to communicate clearly. And so it would boil over. And I think students were kind of surprised when we would confront it as this is interpersonal violence.
Right. Right. And that's something that comes up in like one of our workshops that we do a lot, healthy relationships. And I think it's something that students want to talk about more and more, because when students are leaving high school, you can see, especially in our workshops, this realization that, oh no, my friend group was very toxic and unhealthy and abusive. And I didn't know that there were other ways to be in relationship to other people that's respectful and honoring their dignity.
Yeah. Well, I know that when you and I had chatted previously, you told me a little bit about the Red Flag campaign. Could you tell our audience about it?
Yeah, so that is one of our big awareness campaigns. So the Red Flag campaign, for folks who are currently on campus, which is quite a few of us, you will see it outside the health center. So between the health center and the library on that sloping hill. And there are over 11,000 flags in that hill right there. So the Red Flag campaign is a campaign that started on college campuses in Virginia to really address how rampant dating violence is on college campuses. So we have over 50,000 students on the Auraria campus at all three institutions, which means that based on that, we know that there are over 11,000 survivors on campus. And that's just statistically speaking, right? What we do know is that the number is probably a lot higher because underreporting is a big problem with interpersonal violence. And so that campaign is really a reminder to students that each of those flags is someone that you talk to and care about on this campus. And that if we as a community understand what red flags are and how to look for them, then we can do so much by just saying, hey, I noticed this thing that's happening. We can keep our community so much safer and say, not only, hey, I noticed this thing that's happening. Are you okay? Do you want to be connected to the Phoenix Center?
Ooh, I love that. Because, one of the questions I had planned to ask you was, what's the number one thing a student can do to support somebody if they think something's not right?
Mm-hmm.
Could you share again that phrase? I love that phrase you just used. I think sometimes it helps us to know, let me try this sentence out.
Totally. So one thing that you can say is, hey, I noticed a couple of red flags in your relationship that just caused me a little bit of concern, and I really care about you. And I wanted to let you know that this is something that I was noticing. Can I connect you to the Phoenix Center? And that is always our recommendation. We never want anyone to be dragged to the Phoenix Center. We want the person who needs our services to feel empowered to walk in themselves and not feel like they've been dragged here without any choice. And then really the other thing I think that students can do is just stay connected with that person and let them know that they're there, because one of the big red flags we see a lot is isolation. And so perpetrators and abusers are really good at isolating their victims in order to prevent from anyone noticing what's going on, and to also make it harder for that person to leave. And people aren't always ready to leave when other people are noticing it. So the most powerful thing you can say is not, you should leave right now and you have to listen to what I'm saying. It's, I know you might not be ready right now, but I'm here for you, and I'll continue to be here for you.
Thank you. So let's transition to that student hears that from their friend or loved one that's concerned for them and decides to come to your office. Kind of what's the experience when you come into the Phoenix Center or you call the hotline? What kind of experience will they receive?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because advocacy, I think, is such a misunderstood topic and a misunderstood thing. So really, advocacy is not a one-size-fits-all experience. A person who is experiencing violence or someone who's supporting someone experiencing violence can come in and share as much or as little as they'd like to share with an advocate. And then based on that, an advocate is going to say, here are the options and resources that are available to you. And anything going forward is 100% your choice. It's not that someone has experienced violence and now we're going to say, here's a laundry list of all the things that you have to do, right? Like that's really overwhelming, and it's not really going to help a lot of people, especially when you're experiencing active trauma. That's going to be so overwhelming. And one of the wonderful things about our services as well is that we are confidential. The only exceptions to that are if we believe you're an imminent risk to yourself, others, or elders. But if someone comes here and says that they're experiencing violence, we don't have to start a care report. We don't have to start a Title IX report. Whereas when they tell the average staff or faculty member on campus, that's going to automatically trigger that process. So the Phoenix Center is a great place to come to if you're not sure that reporting is right for you, because it isn't the right choice for every person, but the Phoenix Center can help walk through, like, what does that really look like? And is it the right choice for me? And ultimately that survivor is going to be able to make that decision. And then we're just there to support them and walk alongside them on their healing journey.
Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned the confidentiality about that. And our counseling center is also one of those locations where you can confidentially discuss what's going on and what choices do you want to make as well. So I want to wrap up by letting you tell us a little bit about something fun that you all started, the Phoenix Cast, which is a pretty awesome podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about, what kind of topics you talk about in the Phoenix Cast? When do you upload new episodes, and where can they find you?
Yeah. So the goal of the Phoenix Cast is really to unpack oppression, unpack violence. It's an anti-oppression, anti-racist feminist podcast where we're going to really be breaking down a lot of the different, for instance, media tropes that we see within our television, right? So we did an episode on Tiger King and the elements of abuse that we saw in there. That was one of our early episodes. But then we're also going to just be talking about anything that you can relate to violence. And my not so fun superpower is that I can relate almost anything to violence. So one of the things that I think our very first episode was sex ed for babies, right? And so talking about how everyone having equitable access to sex ed throughout your lifetime is a human rights issue, and it's something that keeps our kids safe. It's something that if kids have the language to explain, hey, this is happening to me, then people can intervene rather than there being a misunderstanding because they didn't receive medically accurate sex ed. So we do have new episodes dropping in the next couple of weeks. And so some of that is going to be around Britney Spears and the conservatorship and kind of the different power and control that we are seeing being utilized there. That is really similar to what happens in many of our clients' different cases. We're also going to be talking about the Chris Watts and Shanann Watts case and kind of talking about the victim blaming that went on there and how social media makes us think we know people in a way that it creates this false sense of intimacy that then really leads to victim blaming. So that's one of the things we're also going to be unpacking. We're also going to be unpacking multi-level media marketing and violence and the ways that they kind of parallel each other. But you can find our podcast anywhere you can find podcasts generally. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google. You can also go to our website and you'll see our full list of podcasts there. And one of the collaborations we also did with one of our partner offices was around the Keep Talking series. So that was through, I believe, case management and dean of students. And so that was like folks sharing their own mental health journeys and like, how did they get the support they needed and what would they say to other folks going through similar things.
So audience, Student Life actually is the host of those Keep Talking audio recordings. And so they're on our YouTube channel where you're watching this video. So I'll make sure to link the playlist below. Those are really powerful as well. And I have listened to several episodes. I did listen to that first episode about sex ed for babies. And I was like, I've never really thought of this before, but it's so relevant to our entire lives of having the language when something's not right. So from the get-go is important.
Absolutely. And one of our most recent series that we did that we ended the second season with was around how our different staff members came to this work. Because I think there's a really big misconception about anti-violence work that you're either completely not personally connected at all to this work or you're very personally connected. And it's actually, there's a lot more in between than that.
Right. Well, audience, if you happen to be a member of a student organization or maybe a group on campus and would be interested in having a workshop, the PCA also does a number of workshops. So they're anywhere from an hour or longer, depending on what your needs are. Can you give us a couple of the topics that they could have you come in and do?
Yeah, so IPV 101 is what is violence. And then we have a grad level response course, which is IPV 301, which really gets into, if we know violence is bad, why does it still keep happening? Like, how do we normalize and perpetuate it within our society? We also have bystander intervention, because we always want to make sure that folks have different safe techniques to intervene, because putting yourself in danger just means that there's more than one victim, more than one survivor. We also have gender construction. So we kind of talk about the different ways that our really rigid gender roles within society can contribute to a culture of victim blaming. We have supporting survivors. So that's one that's really popular, especially with student workers and student organizations who are really looking to best support the members of their organizations or the folks that they're really interacting with on a daily basis, but aren't sure the language and also what are their different responsibilities to the university. We also have media literacy, where we can really break down the harmful messages about the different, about relationships that we get from our media. One of which is, that people will know what they're doing when it comes to sex, right? They generally don't. We don't have good sex ed. And it's just this big myth. And then we also have an intro to comp sex ed to address that, right? So to say like, hey, you should have been getting this information for the past 18 plus years of your life. We're going to do a quick catch up and teach you some self-advocacy skills and talk about why it's so important that we all have the information about our own bodies and our own desires. And then We also have, I think I'm forgetting one more, oh, healthy relationships. And we'll be doing some healthy relationships during Domestic Violence Awareness Month, which is next month in October. So I will send you the information regarding those, because they will be open healthy relationships workshops. And that's a really great way, because a lot of the times when we're talking about relationship violence, we're talking a lot about red flags, and people have a hard time knowing what the green flags are. So how do I have a healthy relationship?
Right.
I know how to not have a healthy relationship, but how do I actually do the healthy part?
I think that's awesome. Well, thank you. Well, folks, that's going to wrap up our interview today. We appreciate you being here and listening about the Phoenix Center of Auraria. Again, this is a tri-institutional office. It serves all 3 institutions. They are located on the 2nd floor of the Tivoli Student Union, right across from IPI. So hopefully that will give you a landmark to find their office. And you can access their services at any time. Again, they have that hotline 24/7, and then their office is open during normal business hours. If something were to happen, they will come to you and help support you. There will be someone who comes and assists you. So I will link down in the show notes all the different resources that you can use. And again, if you were part of a group on campus that would like to invite them in, they are also an education unit. They would be happy to come to your club meeting, to a class session, etc. So, Em, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much. And we're also always happy to do custom presentations. So just want to say that if there's something that you're looking for that we don't currently offer, then we would like to fill that gap.
Okay, thank you. All right, I appreciate you being here today. Bye.
Bye.